Hayley Mills made a fortune for Walt Disney and held a special Academy Award before she was even old enough to drive. You would think the world was at her feet. But when she reached adulthood, most of what she believed had been saved for her was gone, claimed through tax rulings she never truly controlled. This was the brutal reality for Hayley Mills. In the 1960s, she was America's ultimate sweetheart, the unforgettable face of Pollyanna and The Parent Trap. To millions of families, she was the girl who had it all. But behind that radiant trademark smile, a teenage girl was living inside the hidden machinery of childhood fame. The studio did not merely shape her career. It turned her youth into a schedule of work, image, and control, leaving her in a quiet, prolonged psychological struggle. Even her historic Oscar, a symbol of a childhood she never truly owned, was later stolen in a home burglary, a chilling reminder that her past was slipping through her fingers. And now, at 80, Hayley Mills lives in a quieter light. But the wounds of that stolen childhood still make one question impossible to ignore. What happens when the world's most beloved child star discovers that her fortune, her trophy, and even her identity were never fully hers to keep? Before we begin, show your respect for Hayley Mills with a like, for the girl who gave millions their childhood smiles, even while fighting to reclaim her own. To understand the cracks that later fractured the life of Hayley Mills, one must look past the picture-perfect Hollywood posters and step into the heavy reality of a prestigious British acting dynasty. Hayley entered the world into a family of show business royalty. Her father, Sir John Mills, was an absolute titan of the British screen. In their household, acting was not just a profession, it was the family legacy, the very air they breathed. But for a 12-year-old girl trying to find her own voice, that legendary family name became an immense, invisible weight. The public looked at the Mills family and saw a golden portrait of professional success. No one stopped to ask how a child could truly breathe when her entire world was a carefully curated stage. By 1959, the natural rhythms of her childhood vanished. While ordinary children her age were sitting in school desks, dealing with pop quizzes and playground dynamics, Hayley was adapting to the high-pressure, exhausting environment of major movie sets. Her life was no longer governed by school bells, but by relentless call times and production schedules. At only 12 years old, she was surrounded by an intense world of adults, demanding directors, fast-talking agents, and studio executives who viewed her as the valuable young face of a powerful machine. The bright lights of Hollywood did not bring warmth. They created a glass cage. After a long day of filming Disney's Pollyanna, Hayley would not go to a friend's house for a gathering. Instead, she returned to temporary luxury villas where the silence felt profound. The rooms were comfortable, but comfort was not childhood. A driver could take her back from the studio, a maid could open the door, and yet no one could give her the ordinary noise of school friends, secrets, mistakes, and afternoons that belonged only to her. For a young girl thrust into global stardom, applause began replacing friendship. This was not a childhood. It was a continuous professional grind. Every hour of her day was micromanaged, scheduled, and approved by studio executives. The simple freedom to make mistakes, to just play without a camera watching, was entirely gone. Even when she returned to her family's country home, the pressure did not disappear. Her family cared for her deeply, yet her father's massive shadow remained, a constant reminder of the elite standard she had to maintain. It created a profound, split-screen existence. On the outside, she was the ultimate symbol of American teenage joy. making millions of families smile with her infectious energy. On the inside, she was a lonely girl, navigating a demanding adult industry with no peers to talk to. The beautiful mansions and elite social circles did not protect her. They isolated her, keeping the real world at a distance. By the time she finished her largest films, the quiet groundwork for her future emotional exhaustion and financial instability was already set. She was a millionaire on paper, a superstar on screen, but a completely isolated child in reality. By 1960, Hollywood had discovered a new talent, and her name was Hayley Mills. At only 12 years old, this British schoolgirl became a central figure in Walt Disney's family empire. Walt Disney himself viewed her as the perfect face for his optimistic post-war vision. Her American debut in Pollyanna was a cultural landmark. Millions of Americans seeking an escape from the anxieties of a changing decade fell completely in love with her raw, natural talent. It was a performance so impactful that it made history at the 33rd Academy Awards, earning her a special juvenile Oscar. She was among a very small group of children in cinema history to ever hold that rare, miniature statuette. The momentum did not stop there. In 1961, The Parent Trap turned Hayley into a global obsession. Playing estranged twins, she delivered a technical acting masterclass that defied her age. The movie achieved significant commercial success, solidifying a teenage girl as one of Disney's primary stars. Movie posters, hit soundtracks, and sold-out theaters made her a household name from coast to coast. To the American families purchasing tickets, she was the ultimate symbol of joy and success. But behind the massive studio fanfares and that shiny Oscar, the money did not move like a child's dream. It moved through trusts, contracts, guardians, lawyers, and adult decisions. Decisions Hayley was still too young to fully understand. Most of what she earned moved through structures controlled by adults. The most famous child star on Earth lived on a modest weekly allowance provided by her guardians. She was rich on paper, famous in every theater, and still dependent on permission for the smallest parts of her own life. This created a dangerous, silent division behind the scenes. Studio executives spoke glowingly about her value on camera, using her innocent image to market the ultimate American dream. But inside those quiet corporate offices, professionals were drafting long-term contracts and financial arrangements that seemed to protect powerful interests more clearly than the future of a teenage girl. Hayley continued to work, delivering perfect performance after perfect performance, trusting that the adults in the room were looking out for her well-being. She was one of the most famous teenagers on the planet, standing at the top of the world, unaware that a financial structure she did not yet understand was already forming around her. Her historic success was hardening into a cage that would legally limit her independence the moment she reached adulthood. How does a girl become one of Disney's most valuable stars and still reach adulthood without control over the fortune her childhood created? The smile America loved had become a prison Hayley Mills could no longer live inside. By 1965, the Hollywood machine had built a highly profitable mold for her. But at only 19, the teenage star reached a significant professional crossroads. When her 5-year contract with Walt Disney officially concluded, studio executives expected a quick, seamless renewal. They offered her a lifetime supply of safe, wholesome roles, the kind that would keep her in a specific public persona for years to come. But Hayley chose a different path. She chose to move away from the studio because she understood that playing a perpetual child would eventually stifle her creative spirit. The transition from a beloved child star to a respected adult actress is a significant gamble in show business, and Hayley learned that the public's affection often came with a strict, unspoken condition: remain the person they remembered. Desperate for stories that reflected the complexities of life, she returned to England for the 1966 drama, The Family Way. Directed by Roy Bolting, this movie was distinct from the sanitized, sunny fantasy of her Disney era. It was a raw exploration of a working-class couple dealing with real, difficult adult problems. For Hayley, this was not rebellion for attention. It was a young woman trying to prove that the face America loved could carry real life, not only sunshine. The choice challenged everything her previous image had been built to protect. The reaction from certain segments of the audience was immediate and intense. For years, viewers had treated Hayley like a daughter, a symbol of untouchable innocence. Seeing that familiar face move into adult emotional territory made some observers uncomfortable. Tabloids and critics engaged in a frenzy, turning a quiet artistic choice into public discomfort dressed up as scandal. Overnight, the protective bubble that had surrounded her began to shift, leaving her exposed to the harsh, lingering judgment of the adult world. This transition exposed a difficult truth about the entertainment industry. Hollywood knew how to sell the child it remembered, but it did not know how to make room for the woman standing in front of it. The industry frequently preferred a static, established image over an evolving human being. Almost instantly, Hollywood's perception of her shifted. They did not want an independent woman with her own creative vision. They wanted the familiar girl who had once provided immense commercial success. The traits that had made her famous, her vulnerability and charm, were now interpreted differently by the press. Hayley found herself in a challenging career transition, no longer the innocent child, but not yet accepted as a mature, leading lady. She was navigating this alone, fighting for her creative identity and realizing that independence from a corporate empire carried a private cost she had not yet measured. But as Hollywood's doors began to close, a larger, more daunting challenge was waiting for her back home. What happens when a girl risks her reputation to save her future, only to return home and discover that the fortune waiting for her may not be waiting at all? By the late 1970s, the bright lights of mainstream Hollywood had gone cold on Hayley Mills. In a town that constantly hunts for the next fresh face, a former child star entering her 30s is often treated like yesterday's news. The big studios simply stopped calling. For most, that kind of silence is where the creative life begins to disappear. But Hayley refused to sit by the phone and fade into a tragic trivia question. Instead of chasing a Hollywood ghost that no longer wanted her, she packed her bags and returned to the raw, sweat and tears reality of live theatre. She rebuilt her life on the historic stages of London's West End and in small-town American theatres. There were no close-ups here, no multiple takes to repair a mistake. It was just her, a packed house, and the nightly grind of sending real human pain all the way to the back row. Over the next 40 years, she did something astonishing. She survived more than 5,000 live performances across the globe. Her ultimate saving grace came when she took the stage as Anna in The King and I. Night after night on tour, Hayley proved to every skeptical critic that her childhood talent had never been a corporate accident. The stage became her true sanctuary, the one place where studio suits, lawyers, and old contracts could not reduce her to a balance sheet. Ironically, the theater which had begun as an escape from the crushing machinery of film, became the engine that kept her working, grounded, and able to pay her own way for 4 decades. It was a quiet, grinding survival mode, far away from the glitz of Hollywood. Then, in 2024, the industry that had once looked past her was forced to look again. At 78 years old, when many of her peers had already stepped away from the spotlight, Hayley returned to mainstream attention. She accepted a major, high-profile role in the psychological thriller Trap, directed by M. Night Shyamalan. Playing Dr. Josephine Grant, a sharp profiler drawn into a tense pop concert investigation, Hayley held the screen with quiet authority. She did not need to shout. Decades of survival were already speaking through her eyes. A new generation suddenly looked up and noticed her. Moviegoers who had never grown up with her Disney past discovered a presence that felt controlled, weathered, and strangely powerful. She did not let the legal traps of her youth or the cold shoulder of the industry define the ending of her story. Standing under those massive Hollywood lenses once again, she did not look like a victim. She looked like a woman who had outlasted the rooms that once underestimated her. Decades earlier, the system had claimed the earnings and innocence of a young girl, but 70 years later, it could not claim the authority in her voice or the hard-won steadiness in her face. The golden child had not returned to ask Hollywood for mercy. She had returned with the calm of a woman who had already survived its silence. The first real blow of adulthood did not arrive on a movie set. It arrived in numbers, papers, tax language, and the cold realization that the fortune built from Hayley Mills' childhood was no longer waiting for her. When you spend your childhood working 12-hour days under intense studio lights, you are often promised a significant safety net. For Hayley, the understanding was clear. She believed that by the time she reached 21, a substantial fortune would be waiting for her, a reward for all those years of missing school, surrendering privacy, and living in a controlled environment. To the world, she was a multi-millionaire, the ultimate face of Disney's success. But the moment she reached 21 and attempted to take control of her own financial future, the situation proved to be entirely different. It was not a bank robbery or a poor investment, it was the impact of complex tax regulations. During the peak of her fame, the UK government had adjusted its top marginal tax rates to levels reported to be exceptionally high. Because her Disney contracts were locked into specific tax frameworks, she faced a scenario where tax rulings claimed the vast majority of what she had expected to keep. Years later, Hayley would describe the loss with a brutal simplicity. In effect, the money had gone to the tax man. It was not merely a tax bill, it was a devastating loss of the childhood earnings she believed would protect her. Hayley did not accept this without seeking justice. She pursued the matter through the legal system. The process was a difficult, expensive endeavor that exhausted the small amount of resources she had left. Her legal team argued that it was fundamentally unbalanced to tax a child's earnings at the same rate as a corporate entity, especially when that child had no input into how the money was generated or managed. However, the courts operated based on the established rulebook. Every appeal was concluded with bureaucratic finality. When the final verdict was delivered, it was a profound loss. The institutional doors closed, and just like that, her financial security was gone. The global icon, the girl who had owned the screen, was now forced to begin adult life without the cushion her work had promised. The realization was difficult. Everything she had built, every sacrifice she had made as a child, had been affected by a legal stroke of a pen. A 21-year-old woman stood before the adult world with an Oscar in her past, a famous face the public still adored, and a bank account that no longer matched the childhood she had given away. She was left standing alone, stripped of the cushion her talent had earned, and forced to face adulthood without the safety net she had been promised. It was a cold introduction to the reality of the entertainment industry, a world that treats you like an asset when you are profitable and like a stranger when you are not. She was not just starting over. She was learning that in the world of high-stakes fame, a performer must eventually become her own advocate. From that moment on, Hayley Mills had to carry a truth no child star should ever have to learn. The world can applaud your childhood and still leave you to rebuild your adulthood alone. By the time Hayley Mills started filming The Family Way, she was already navigating a turbulent period. As she sought to define her own path, she encountered a firestorm of public and media scrutiny. On the set, she grew close to the film's director, Roy Bolting. He was 53, she was 20. To the conservative media of the 1960s, this was not viewed as a private life decision. It was framed as a public controversy. The press did not cover them as a couple. They covered them as a scandal. Headlines focused on the age difference, and for a girl who had been carefully packaged as America's wholesome sweetheart, this was a difficult awakening. Overnight, she went from being the public's favorite to a target of speculation. Her every move was dissected, her character analyzed, and her career shadowed by a narrative she could not control. The public was not just criticizing her, they were struggling with the evolution of the perfect child they believed they owned. The headlines made it look simple, but Hayley's life had never given her the simple map most young women receive. She had spent her entire childhood in a studio-built world, managed by executives, surrounded by cameras, and isolated from people her own age. She never had a normal adolescence, a normal early romance, or the freedom to make normal mistakes. When she met Bolting, she was not just looking for a relationship, she was reaching for stability. She was a 20-year-old woman who felt as though she had already carried a lifetime of pressure, searching for an adult presence that seemed to offer the security she had been denied during her formative years. But to the public, that context did not exist. They saw a tabloid headline. In 1971, they were married. It was a move that left her more isolated from the industry support she still needed. But the foundation of that marriage was tested from the beginning. They were not just facing their own differences, they were facing the world's judgment. The strain was constant, a combination of external pressure and the reality of a 33-year age gap. By 1977, the marriage concluded. The divorce was public and emotionally draining. This era left Hayley feeling profoundly exhausted. She was not just dealing with a personal separation, she was dealing with the erosion of her public reputation. The years that should have been her prime, time for self-discovery and growth, were consumed by legal battles and the labor of rebuilding her life. It is a poignant chapter, one that reveals how quickly the world can punish a woman for making private choices that do not align with public expectations. Hayley thought she was finding refuge in a relationship, but instead, she found herself standing in the middle of intense public scrutiny. She survived the ordeal, but she lost her sense of security. And as the situation concluded, she faced a new reality. She was older, her reputation had been impacted, and her financial safety net was gone. When the world punished her for becoming herself, Hayley Mills had to learn the hardest form of survival, trusting her own light after everyone else had tried to rename it. When the judgment, the divorce, and the financial battles finally settled, Hayley Mills was left in a silence more frightening than scandal. By the late 1970s, she had not just been an actress, she had been a corporate asset. First, the face of the Disney empire, then the center of tabloid interest. But when the dust settled, she was left with the one thing no child star is prepared for: a colder kind of invisibility. She was not the prodigy anymore. She was a woman in her 30s, standing in the cold reality of an industry that treats former icons as though they belong to the past. The most difficult part was not the lack of work, it was the look in people's eyes. As she walked through London, strangers would still stop her, mentioning Pollyanna or The Parent Trap. They were living in a nostalgic bubble, seeing a girl who had not existed for 15 years. Meanwhile, Hayley was living in the real world, navigating the frustration of financial instability. Imagine being a global household name only to find yourself waiting in line at an audition, standing next to young performers who had no idea you were once the biggest star on the planet. The room did not need to be cruel. A clipboard, a polite smile, and a chair by the wall were enough to tell her how far the world had moved on. The roles were smaller, the pay thinner, and the recognition quieter than the memory of her name. The rejection was systematic. Casting directors did not always see a veteran performer, they saw a former star. You could see the pity in their faces the moment she walked into the room. A silent, patronizing acknowledgement that she had been successful far too early. For a woman who had spent her entire adolescence proving herself to Disney's demanding executives, this was a difficult, biting experience. She was being told that her history did not matter and that her experience was less valuable than the novelty of a new face. This was not just an economic struggle, it was an emotional journey of self-redefinition. Without the Disney brand to hide behind, or the safety net of a major contract, she had to dismantle the person the world thought she was. She had to move beyond the golden child persona to survive. Every small theater gig, every grueling rehearsal, and every closed door was a lesson in humility. She was not performing for a marketing campaign anymore. She was performing because it was the only way to maintain her footing. But here is the irony. The industry's distance became her greatest strength. By not providing her with the easy roles, Hollywood's distance pushed her to stop relying on her past. She started developing a craft that was not built on cuteness or wholesome charm, but on the disciplined, practical grit of a working actress. It was a difficult, painful transition from being a managed product to becoming a self-reliant professional. Her value was no longer the height she once reached, but the years she kept walking after the crowd had stopped looking. She was not chasing the spotlight anymore. She was chasing her own independence. But even as she rebuilt her life from the remnants of her childhood fame, a new, unexpected challenge was waiting in the shadows of the next decade. The world still wanted Hayley Mills to remain a memory, but she was quietly becoming something far harder to dismiss. A woman who had learned how to survive without being recognized. To the world, Hayley Mills was the girl who had it all: a radiant smile, an Oscar, and a career that made her a household name. But behind the glossy posters and the Disney fanfares, the human cost of that fame was mounting. The public saw a girl who seemed frozen in youth, but they did not see the silent, grueling battles she was carrying inside. For Hayley, the spotlight was not just a career. It was a structure that pressured her to fit into an impossible, youthful image. The desire to maintain that image became a heavy burden. While the world watched The Parent Trap, Hayley was navigating a secret, difficult period involving her health, body image, and the quiet pressure to look untouched by ordinary pain. It was a lonely, challenging time. In the 1960s, few people spoke openly about mental health or body image. You were expected to show up, smile, and look perfect. So she did. She lived a divided life, the wholesome icon on camera, and a girl trying to survive her own private wounds off camera. She survived by silently reclaiming her identity piece by piece, far away from the prying eyes of studio executives. Decades later, life presented her with a different kind of challenge. In 2008, when she was finally enjoying a stable, independent life on the theater stage, she received a diagnosis of breast cancer. This time, the pressure was no longer coming from a studio office. It was coming from inside her own body. And in true Hayley Mills fashion, she did not turn it into a media spectacle. She did not seek sympathy. She searched for the strength to continue her work. Through months of difficult treatment, she continued to perform. There were nights when the costume hid more than a character. It hid fatigue, fear, and a private discipline the audience could not see. Under the stage lights, she carried the side effects quietly, with the crowd unaware of what was happening beneath the fabric, the makeup, and the practiced calm of a professional face. She was an actress on stage and a woman carrying pain privately, keeping the two worlds separate with a wall of absolute discipline. It is a level of resilience that is difficult to fathom. She did not announce it to the world until she had successfully navigated the fight. When she finally went public, it was not to collect pity. It was to show others that you can be frightened, tired, and uncertain, and still continue to show up. Facing these internal and physical challenges in her youth and her maturity, Hayley's life became a masterclass in resilience. She never let the wounded places of her health define her narrative. She took the blows, kept her private life private, and remained focused on the craft that kept her grounded. People often look at survivors and ask where they find their strength. But looking at Hayley, the answer is simple. It is not found in the big, loud victories. It is found in the quiet, agonizing moments when you are hurting, exhausted, and losing, but you decide to keep going anyway. The most difficult performance of Hayley Mills' life may not have been for Disney, Broadway, or film. It may have been the quiet act of showing up while her body and memory were asking for rest. After the storms of divorce, the financial challenges, and the weight of being a former golden child, Hayley Mills finally did what most child stars never managed to do. She escaped the ghost of her own past. She did not simply settle down. She built a foundation of stability with her own hands. By the late 90s, the woman who had been managed, marketed, and judged for much of her life slowly took back the keys to her own existence. In 1997, she began a new chapter with actor Firdaus Bamji. They did not build that chapter for the press, public approval, or Hollywood's narrative. In a life defined by scrutiny, Firdaus became a real partner. Not another handler, not another critic, not another voice telling her who she was supposed to be. For the first time in a long time, she was not a brand, a product, or a childhood image preserved for other people's comfort. She was simply Hayley. Professionally, she stopped waiting for the industry to resurrect her. She went to work. She took roles in projects like Wild at Heart, filmed in the raw, sprawling landscapes of South Africa. She did voiceovers. She wrote. She proved that she did not need the Disney machine to remain relevant. She only needed to remain focused. She became a working professional who answered finally to herself. Every role she took, no matter how small, was an act of personal autonomy. She was proving that an actress's value is not measured only in box office millions, but in the discipline it takes to show up when no one is arranging a comeback for you. But the most powerful shift was not in her bank account or her resume. It was in her perspective. If you look at her recent appearances, there is an ease there that she did not possess as a teenager. It is not the forced, Disney-approved smile from 1960. It is a calm, earned satisfaction. The resentment did not vanish in one dramatic moment. It loosened as she built a life no studio could schedule for her. She stopped living with her eyes fixed on the people who had claimed her earnings, the critics who had shamed her choices, and the industry that had once tried to keep her frozen in one image. Hayley spent decades being the wholesome daughter to millions of families, but she eventually had to let go of that identity to find the woman underneath it. Looking back at her journey, from the dizzying height of the Oscar stage to the cold silence of audition rooms to the quiet confidence of her life today, one thing becomes clear. Hayley Mills did not just survive the Hollywood machine. She outlived the version of herself it tried to preserve. She did not simply find peace, she negotiated it on her own terms. For anyone who has ever been trapped inside an old reputation, Hayley's later chapter carries a rare kind of comfort. The cameras stopped rolling on her childhood a long time ago, but the story of who she actually is has finally become her own. For Hayley Mills, peace did not arrive as applause. It arrived as a quieter authority, the ability to answer to her own name without asking the past for permission. Today, at 80, Hayley Mills lives with the calm of a woman who no longer needs the world to return what it took. If you look at her now, living between a quiet home in London and the rugged coast of Cornwall, it is difficult to believe this is the same girl who once had the entire world calling her name. The frantic high-pressure circus of the 1960s film sets feels like another lifetime now. For a woman who grew up with a camera lens permanently fixed on her every move, this chapter is not simply retirement. It is the first time in her life she has been allowed to exist without being packaged, scheduled, protected, corrected, or sold as someone else's idea of innocence. The financial story here is perhaps one of the most satisfying reversals in her journey. After tax rulings claimed much of her childhood fortune when she reached adulthood, she had to begin again, without the cushion her work had promised. Today, the financial foundation she has secured is the result of her own persistence. Theater, television, film, voiceover work, and writing. It is not the simple comfort of money preserved by adults in a trust. It is the result of a woman who refused to let an early loss become the final definition of her life. That independence became her real safety net. Since her 2008 breast cancer diagnosis and recovery, Hayley has moved through her 80s with a steadiness that feels earned rather than effortless. She does not accept every script that lands on her desk anymore. She does not need to. When she appears now, whether in meaningful projects, interviews, or retrospective tributes, she arrives not as the wholesome brand Disney once sold, but as Hayley Mills, a woman who has lived long enough to separate the performance from the person. But the most profound shift is the one no resume can fully capture. She is a mother and a grandmother. There is a specific kind of light in her eyes now, the kind that does not come from studio lamps or premiere cameras, but from watching family continue beyond the noise that once consumed her. She has traded the competitive, cutthroat hallways of Tinseltown for the grounded joy of seeing another generation grow at its own pace. It is the ultimate reflection. The girl who was forced to grow up too fast is finally able to be present for the slow, beautiful unfolding of someone else's childhood. From the golden child of 1960 to the woman of 2026, Hayley Mills has lived a life defined not merely by the roles she played, but by the storms she survived. She stopped defending her narrative to people who only wanted the version of her they remembered. She stopped requesting relevance from an industry that had once placed her in a glass case and then moved on. She simply reclaimed her story. The special Oscar that once symbolized a childhood she never fully owned now carries a different meaning. It is no longer just a trophy from a lost era or a miniature reminder of what Hollywood once made of her. It stands as proof that she endured the machinery around it. She did not let tax rulings, tabloids, health challenges, fading offers, or the cold silence of the industry decide the final shape of her name. She showed up, she worked, she rebuilt, and piece by piece, she turned a public identity into a private life that finally belonged to her. Hayley Mills's journey is not just about a star who transitioned and returned, it is about what remains when the cameras finally stop rolling. For a girl who spent her life being packaged, managed, celebrated, judged, and eventually overlooked by the Hollywood machine, the true victory was never only the Oscar or the millions. It was the quiet, hard-won ability to finally own her own name. Fame is a flash. It can make a child famous before she understands contracts, money, reputation, or the cost of being remembered too young. But character is built in the years after the flash fades, in the work done when no one is cheering, in the boundaries built to protect sanity, in the private decisions that allow a person to become whole again. The girl once treated as the world's most famous asset did not end as a possession of the industry. She became the keeper of her own name, the architect of her own peace, and the living proof that a life can be rebuilt after money, image, health, and reputation have all been tested. If Hayley's story of resilience and grace resonated with you, please take a moment to show your respect with a like and subscribe. We are exploring the lives of Hollywood's most resilient icons every week. Which part of Hayley Mills's journey moved you the most? The fortune she lost, the childhood she never fully owned, the health battle she survived, or the quiet peace she finally built for herself? Leave a comment below. I want to hear your thoughts. Thank you for joining us in the spotlight today.